promote solutions for creating inclusive educational environments for underrepresented students and faculty. Dr. Miles has received her PhD in curriculum and instruction in the science of learning from the University at Buffalo in 2017. Dr. Miles went on to Vanderbilt University, a part of the nationally competitive Academic Pathways Fellowship, where she completed nearly 3 years as a postdoctoral researcher for diversity in STEM higher education. Dr. Miles's research focuses on the role of identity, racialized experiences, and marginalization in K through 12 and higher education STEM and health profession environments. Dr. Miles has over 25 publications where she and her colleagues have critically examined educational spaces across the pipeline. Today, she will share with us some of her preliminary findings from the PAEA research team, and the title of her talk is Snowflake on the Iceberg: Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives Across PA Programs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Miles.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? All right, thumbs up. Awesome, awesome. I first like to say I'm so happy to be here today. I'm going to share some data with you that is literally hot off the press. And one thing that I admire about this group in particular is you guys are really causing associations and programs to question what it is that they're doing. Do not let the pressure up, right? So I'm gonna have some data that backs that up, right? So when I say keep it coming, right? We can't let them breathe, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and share my slides. As I'm doing that, I'm just gonna drop something in the chat because I'm gonna go to a slide. Go ahead and click that link and put which indigenous land are you occupying, right? So I'm on the land of the Haudenosaunee, and I just want to give a special shout out to the Tuscaroras, right? Because they have historical and contemporary issues, right? So they still do not have clean drinking water on the reservation. They also had their land that not only was a part of their reservation, but land that they purchased taken away from them for the Power Authority. So let's just acknowledge the fact that they're here. They have issues today, right? So these are living, breathing people. We have histories of just the boarding schools, which is traumatic. If you want a little bit of what that is, watch Indian Horse on Netflix. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. And my desktop is always a mess, so you might see all my business. Don't judge me. Okay, do you guys see my slide, my presentation slide? All right. So why did I title it Snowflake on the Iceberg? We always talk about the tip of the iceberg. I'm like, no, baby, we looking at one snowflake, right? And I want you to know that there is so much work that needs to be done, that it needs to be all hands on deck. Everybody is going to have a station on this underground railroad of trying to inform to transform educational spaces, right? So nobody gets to take a break because they've taken a break for, I mean, we can just start with the beginning, right? So they've never had to think fully about inclusion, right? So again, just keep dropping whose land, acknowledging, right? So I'm going to keep going. I want to acknowledge the PAEA research team. We are a team of color. Rania, the only reason we don't have a picture of her today because she doesn't start till January 10th. This will be our first DEI coordinator. And I wouldn't have the work that I do today without acknowledging the team that I'm really representing, right? So there is no one person show in this work. They're all dope individuals, right? And one thing I want to push back on, you do not have to have a PhD or even a degree to do research. You don't have to have those things to even publish. Right. But academia will tell us these things. Right. So if anybody leaves this space and they're like, yo, I want to do a little bit more or learn a little bit more about research, reach out to me. I'm going to share my email. I have worked with everything from school teachers to kids with publishing, and I have no problem throwing people on papers. OK, so you will. And I always got a paper in the pipe. I said by this year, I'm going to get to 30. All right. Anyway, so the two things that I'm going to share is I'm going to share with you the most recent PAEA data. I've already shared with Alexandria the best practices and DEI toolkit. Those are behind our member wall, but I shared them with her so she can disseminate, share that. That is our most widely downloaded resource that programs should be using if they have nothing, right? Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean we don't have further work to do. That means where are we at with this right here? right? So use it to arm yourselves, right? One of the things I had to learn, especially being a minoritized woman, a Black woman in these educational spaces, I had to know handbooks in and out. I could tell people what page it's on. I'm sorry, no, I'm sorry, I have yet to read. Where did that appear? So just know that it is okay to do that, and that is us responding to being minoritized people, right? So the last thing I want to do is urge students to leverage their positioning to increase awareness of DEI strategies for the program. Like basically, do not let the fire up, right? Um, the DEI toolkit is really, so there's two documents, right? We knew it was the most downloaded resource, but we also didn't know how people were using it. So we were like, we need to collect some data on this. So this is a national data set I'm going to share with you. So the DEI toolkit talks about setting goals, creating benchmarks. The best practices I kind of think of as like the meat and potatoes, right? So how might that appear or show up in admissions, right? People always talk about they have these holistic admissions processes, but at the same time, if you're not pushing back and thinking through how race and racism has operated, you're just going to reify the same racist outcomes, which you've done. And that's what we're seeing, right? So I'm going to start there. So I'm going to dive right into the data and hopefully leave some time for y'all to ask me some questions. That this was developed in partnership with the Research Mission Advancement Commission, which we call the RMAC, right? So the DIMAC was very influential in developing the best practices toolkit and the DEI toolkit, and the RMAC was the one that helped us come up with, okay, how are we going to see? So how are we going to research answering some of these questions in partnership with the PAEA research team? And if I'm going too fast, just somebody slow me down. We get excited about these things and the spirit just be moving. All right. So the survey was conducted and we kind of tagged it onto our rapid response for. The rapid response surveys were to let us know what was going on with programs during COVID. But at the same time, we have this national uprising where everybody's woke now. We have your attention. Right. So it gave us good entry into, well, let's ask now about DEI. Right. And so it was just over this summer. So it was only open for 1 month. We had 162 programs respond. Right. And so that's about 60%. So 58% response rates of all our members. So is this every single program? I mean, your program, I'm like, well, I didn't take the survey or whatever it is. Right. And that's fine. But at the end of the day, we have enough data to say this is kind of the gist of what we're seeing. All right. I don't think people are going to be too surprised, but some of the things that I want to point out is, so when we ask programs, right? So remember 162 programs. Does your program have a DEI goal? Yeah, 72%. I'm going to drop it down to the bottom. They're working towards continuous improvement in their DEI efforts. Program director said, yes, we're doing that, right? 67%. Implement strategies and tactics to support DEI goals. We're starting to see a drop. Well, okay, now we're saying measures the effectiveness of strategies taken to address DEI goals, right? So that means, okay, well, you have goals, but you don't even know if they're effective or not, right? So they just doing busy work. I call that all that busy work. Now we say, well, do you readjust DEI goals at critical milestones? We ain't doing that. We're not doing that, right? And so, you only have 18% of programs saying that they do that. You see, the more intense and the more strategic this gets, and you can literally take the DEI toolkit and it maps right onto what they say, right? So if you're like, has DEI goals, if you're like, what does that mean? Go to the toolkit and follow that along. So that's how we made it. We wrote the survey in that way so that programs can then go back and double check what did that mean. So then we said, well, let's just break this up a little bit. Okay, is it who's responding here, right? So we said we had 117 private institutions and 42 public. Overall, public institutions were more likely to have more commitments as it relates to DEI. Does that mean there were leaps and bounds ahead? No, that doesn't mean that, right? That means there's a bit of an uptick, just so that we're kind of seeing that and they're the lighter green, right? So when it says we're working towards improvement in their DEI efforts, well, there's a difference of 74% versus 65, right? So it's significant, but it's not like, oh, well, they just got it together. So I don't want you to think that. Then we looked at, well, what are so DEI best practices. This is the best practices document that Alexandra is going to share with you, right? So we said, does your institution support to has institutional support to promote diversity efforts within your program? 70% of the programs say, yeah, we got that. Then when it comes down to incorporates diversity into the curricula by defining culturally diverse perspective as it relates to diverse outcomes, they're like, yeah, we do that, 66%. Makes appropriate changes to better support students and faculty's experience. 63% of the programs say they do this. Now, remember, this is program directors' perceptions of what they do. This is not taking into account students. This is not taking into account faculty. So we could find, if we were to continue with this work, there could be a difference of opinion. Has access to resources to promote diversity efforts within their program. 50% of the programs say, yeah, we have that. Right. So remember, this is 162 programs. Has working definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does that mean in our program? Fifth, again, it drops. This is something you could go back to your program and say, I'm sorry, what do you mean by diversity? Have we defined that? I'm sorry, I'm struggling with what does that look like? Can you point me to where that is? And again, now when it comes to the public institutions are again a bit ahead, especially when it comes to has a working definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So there was a bigger gap. So the private institutions, if you're a minoritized person, you might want to ask some additional questions if you're considering of what might be a good placement for you. Now, here's where some of the rubber meets the road. DEI best practices. Now, this is what our group came up with. This is out of research. So here are some best practices, but this is where programs have the lowest level of engagement. Engages in mentorship networks to strengthen and support a diverse PA program. 19 or 20% of the programs said they have that, right? So again, remember, this is 162 programs. Places value on cognitive diversity in the recruitment efforts. Again, it's dropping. So that means they could be privileging things like your GRE scores and your GPA, where if you're thinking about the cognitive diversity, you might be thinking about cultural and linguistic differences and, backgrounds and so on and so forth, which would make a more diverse student population, right? Sets aside time to learn about updated laws or policies that may affect how to strategize to fulfill the mission and statement. Right? We know laws and policies change. There has to be somebody familiarizing themselves with what is the policy on this? Is this a policy violation, or is this just this didn't feel good? Right? So when I say learn your policies, that's a tip or a trick you take any workspace, because then you'll know if this is a clear violation or if this is this doesn't feel good. This is a cultural climate issue, right? Has time released. Now, again, remember, we're dropping. The more we ask of programs, the less they're doing. Has time allotted to promote diversity efforts within programs. So if you only have 14% of the programs saying that they are dedicating time, then guess what that means? You really ain't doing nothing, right? So sit with that, right? Then, the revolution needs resources. Folks of color have been doing what we can on shoestrings or free or for the free with what we doing what we can, what we got. However, institutions have resources. Has a dedicated budget to promote diversity efforts within the program, right? So that means they have a line in the budget, 4%. Well, we could say 5 if we want to be generous, right? 5% of the respondents said they had that, right? So let this keep sitting with you. Now, I'm just going to kind of, for the sake of time, I already kind of hit on this point. I could share these slides also so that if you need to reference them, but I want to kind of slide on to, we also asked, so we did the survey part, but we also asked, because we have Nikki, who's our mixed methods analyst, we said, look, let's start throwing some qual questions in here. Let's start analyzing, what do they say when we give them open text responses? So here is our so we analyzed their response to basically what facilitated the advancement of DEI goals, right? So there were some things that they said were barriers, but I'm not going to focus on the barriers, because I think the most powerful thing for your group to realize is that you are coming through on national surveys, right? This is going to be a report that you could cite, right? So the first thing is DEI officer or leader at a program. So that means they have a dedicated person. So 48%. So of these responses, let me take one step back. So of those 162 programs, we had 122 programs respond to qualitative responses. So that was over 73% of programs. They wanted to say something else. Right. And so in these descriptions, they describe, we came in open. We didn't say, here's our code book. We stepped back and we let the data talk to us. So that's why it makes it even more powerful. They said, having a dedicated DEI officer or a leader at the program or institution really helps move these things along, because then somebody's watching, somebody's making sure the needle is moving, somebody's holding folks accountable, right? So if your program doesn't have that, that may be something you want to rally around and start beating on the desk. The second thing is institutional support. Well, that kind of goes along with, well, if you have institutional support, you're more likely to have a DEI officer, right? Or somebody who's in charge, right? So you can see how these things are coming together. Now, I believe the 3 and 4 are you all. Increased awareness and social pressure. Number 3, student feedback and involvement in initiatives, right? And I want to just say really quickly, you see how ARC PA is towards the bottom and we're at the very last. They like, well, PAEA, we like your resources, but it's really these social pressures, right? So you have the institutional responses, you have the social pressures, and students. I really think, and we know that historically all social movements were led by young people, right? Some students, right? So when we're talking civil rights, those are young people, those are college students, right? And so just remembering that, and don't lose that, you are empowered. So going on to the next one, saying that they had DEI focused curriculum and a mission that explicitly talked about DEI. They said that was really important to have. And then they had where they said, well, if we had DEI goals and we had strategies for implementation, well, that was really good to have those things, right? And they should go together, right? You shouldn't have goals and not know how to get there. How do you know if you're effective, right? Here was another thing. They said DEI conscious admissions processes. What I want us to kind of push back against is assuming that holistic means DEI conscious or racially conscious, or because we know what critical race theory tells us is that racism has a way of reifying itself, and our job is to figure out what does it look like next, right? So what racism and oppression looks like today doesn't always readily match what it looked like 100 years ago or 50 years ago, right? And that's another thing, it's normalized, right? So it looks normal to the mainstream dominant groups. And it's the minoritized people that are like, wait, hold on, wait a minute. This is wrong, right? This is really wrong. And then I want to say the ARC PA standard, right? That is something that you all could say, well, hold on, that's on their website. That's not hidden information, right? So you could say, well, ARC PA says we're supposed to be doing this. What does it look like? I'm confused. Show us what it looks like, because I can't make these connections, right? And so people may talk in riddles and rhymes, and they could talk about like they're doing these things, but sometimes what we find when we pull back the cloak is that they may not have much strategy, right? Sorry. Sorry, my last. I'm getting it together. But then also, underrepresented faculty actively engaged in DEI initiatives. And this one I want to caution you on too, right? So that doesn't mean that underrepresented faculty are not embedded in these processes along the way. The problem becomes that you have the cultural tax and the Black tax, and I mean, you can go on from there, that underrepresented faculty are spearheading and single-handedly doing these things in addition to their workloads, and oftentimes not getting recognition, not getting compensation. And, it can really take a toll on those individuals. And then they're at the end, they said, thank you for your toolkit, PAEA. Y'all been great, right? So we're not at the top of the list. So what does that mean for students? And I'm going to wrap it up. And so hopefully you have some time to ask me some questions. So then what does that mean for students? Again, the biggest social movements are led by or have been or heavily involved students. Why? Because y'all don't care. Y'all don't care. This is your policy. It ain't mine. It doesn't feel good. I don't like this. This is not right. You go fix your policy because whoever created it can recreate it, right? So you recognize that policies are put in place by people. So that means a person can go back and change it, right? We're not talking about the boogeyman. The next thing is respond to the needs of marginalized people, right? And I'm going to talk about what that 10% means. Why do you want to respond to the needs of the most marginalized and highlight the issues of the most marginalized? Because it's what they're experiencing is normalized. And if you see it, call it out, right? Because it looks obvious to you thinking about that Matrix film, right? Which pill are you going to take, the red pill or the blue pill? It looks obvious to you. What I have found doing this work for the years I've been doing it, it is not obvious. You have to sometimes back it up and, spell it out in such a concrete example, unfortunately, right? But this is where I want you to know it only takes 10%. What business literature has taught us is that stop trying to convince everybody to rock with you and to work with you. In any space, if you want to change the culture, it only takes 10%. Don't spend your energy on the people that are so far removed from you and your thinking, right? So thinking about that bell curve, they so far on the other side, don't waste your time on them. Focus on that middle group, because it's a larger group that literally don't know what to do and don't know what they're seeing. Don't waste your energy on convincing those left-wing people, right? Determine where you want to start, right? So where are you at? Where do you want to start? And I think that's the one of the biggest things I've had to learn, right? So, and being a part of a community, right? So whether that be which I highly recommend, being involved in your local communities, right? Being knowledgeable of those issues, because you can show up as citizens, right? You can show up at school board meetings, you can show up at city council meetings, exercise your civic rights, because oftentimes we just assume people are gonna do right. And what do we know? They do not. So hold these folks accountable, right? Be knowledgeable in a focus area and show up for others. So what does that mean? So determine where you want to start. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert in police reform, right? You can say, well, police reform isn't really my issue, but I show up and I listen to those that this is their station. And I ask them, how can I help or how can I be engaged, right? And I always say this, develop some kind of strategy for yourself or with your peers, right? So sometimes you need to follow the policy. This is one of the things that students can often get frustrated by, or young people also, just period, right? Because they're like, is there a policy for this? Or they're like, I don't care what the policy is. I'm just mad and somebody's going to hear me out. Sometimes what happens is the message doesn't get to the appropriate person that can actually just make the change. And sometimes it's just that simple. Like, no, who's responsible for this? Who do I need to speak to about this issue? And then, okay, well, I'm gonna go have this conversation with them. Sometimes you could be having a conversation with, let's say, a faculty member, but they're not put in a position to actually change the policy. Well, who's voting on these policies? Who, where's this happening? Right. And then other times you just need to turn the table over. Right. And so that's the discernment. When do you need to follow a policy and when do you need to turn a table over? And then lastly, identify and celebrate your successes. So, and that's hard, right? Because you're like, you can get overwhelmed, like, oh my God, I mean, all of these injustices in the world. And yes, it's heavy. However, find small wins, find ways to celebrate and enjoy those that are on the struggle with you, and fill your cup. So sometimes, I might listen to, if I'm writing a paper and I'm like, okay, I got to get this out and I got to get it just right. I might listen to trap music to fill my cup that day. Because I'm about to go in on this paper. Or it may be, let me hang out with my homegirls, right? Or whatever it is. Or let me talk through this in these various ways, right? It could be, let me talk to my therapist about this, make sure I ain't crazy, right? Whatever it is you need to do to fill your cup, that is just as important as you learning to do what you need to do to be a part of this movement. And if you're aware of these issues and you do not act, you're complicit. There is no middle of the road. You're in or you're out, right? And so, and I would just say that, right? And so Not everybody needs to be on the, at the protest holding a sign, right? Because at one point in my life, that's where it was, where, I would carry around signs in my car, and my daughter would be like, oh, we guess we going to the protest. I have blank ones just in case it didn't say what I needed it to say that day, right? So not everybody needs to be at the protest, but figuring out what your station is. And I'm going to stop there. And if you have any questions for me, I don't know if there's time for questions, but I, again, appreciate this, just the opportunity to share some of this national data with you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miles. That was amazing. I think I can speak for everyone here just saying that you just reinvigorated us today, and it was what we needed. Feeling, just feeling validated in a lot of the work that we've been doing, and knowing that our voices are being heard. So I wanted to open it up to see if anybody has a few questions before we take a break and head to our next speaker. Looks like Karina has a question.
I always have a question. Dr. Miles, just thank you so much for speaking. I loved your energy and everything you had to say. You kind of inspired me now, because I don't know if everyone on this call received it, but I do remember getting an email not too long ago for my program from PAEA about a 30-minute survey. So I don't know if you want to just talk about that, or if maybe people haven't received it from their program, maybe there's a way that they can still access it and fill out the survey if they're students. And I guess that was more of a comment, but my question is, I don't know if you can speak on behalf of PAEA, maybe just as yourself, but has there been any research into looking at the racial implications of the GRE and the PACAB being implemented as a way to have students accepted into programs?
So right now, our research team isn't really looking into that, although we know it is something that we should do a national audit on, right? And one of the things that's stepping into this role, I'm like, it's like, which issue, where do you start, right? So I would say there is research on it. I don't have those like articles like ready to roll, but we do have a senior director of admissions, Dr. Donna Murray, who is very knowledgeable and is with PAEA. And so she's our admissions guru. So I would definitely encourage you to reach out to her. But what I would say is we already know, and the data has already come out, that the GRE don't predict how you're going to do in grad school. However, we want to keep researching something that we know this already. Like this goes right along with, when they had like those intelligence tests, like all it does is reproduce racist outcomes. We actually don't need another study. What we need to say is, why are you doing, like, you need to stop this policy, right? You need to stop this practice. It is not predictive of if somebody's going to be successful within the program. But what do? We reify that, exclusive. That's one way to exclude and say it's policy, right? When it comes to the PCATs and things like that, my thing is, again, I don't even know if there's research. I mean, there might be some research on it. I'm not sure that the research really, again, can you really take a test at the beginning and to determine if you're going to be successful, right? And then what is then the responsibility of the institution and program to then support those along the way, right? So I would say that to your first part of your question. The second part of your question is student data. If your program is not sending out the survey, that's probably a red flag, because that is the national data set. And we've also added some additional questions in there that lets us get to the root of, and we've added some more DEI stuff. So we really try to look at each instrument at a time. So we're getting ready to launch our incoming, right? So students that are getting ready to matriculate. So there's two places in which you should have took the surveys, one in the beginning, but within your first 3 months, and then right there towards the end. So we have the beginning and we have the end. In the end, we're starting to add questions about, the climate, right? What was it like for you? And then we can see if you're a minoritized person or not. We can say, ooh, a lot of the minoritized people are saying the environment is this, because what happens when we look at climate data, if you're only looking at the majority, which are white women, and they're like, oh, everything's good. You're like, wow, our environment is over. Oh, this is great. We don't have anything else to do. But if you don't disaggregate and look at minoritized individuals, you ain't really looked at your climate data. because you have to look at the most marginalized in that space to really get your litmus of how things are really going, right? So the first one would be, oh God, what is it? The matriculating student survey. And then the last one will be the end of program survey. Perfect. There we go. End of program. And if you have any additional questions, I know my time is up. If you have any additional questions about those surveys, if you're interested in research or you want to hear more about it, I'll drop my email. But also Alexandria has my stuff. She knows I'm I try to be as responsive as possible. But really, you all are the revolution. Right? So you all are the change. You ain't waiting for change, you're doing it. Like change ain't, we always think about, oh, change is gonna come. No, change is now. So just remember that the change is now, whether they're comfortable with it or not. Do not let the heat up. Keep inviting people to these circles, right? Keep inviting, because you all are really transforming what the landscape of PAs could look like, right? And we can start to see more minoritized PAs, and we could start to see more culturally responsive, right, and culturally considerate PAs on the outside. So that's all. I don't know if you was that. I think that's my time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Dr. Miles. I believe we'll be heading to a break. And again, as she mentioned, if anybody has further questions, please feel free to add them in the chat and hopefully we'll be able to address them. Thank you so much.